The monitors flatlined at 3:47 in the morning. The doctors shouted. The nurses scrambled. The room filled with a sound no one ever wants to hear, the long, steady scream of a machine telling you that someone is gone. Her name was Sarah Calloway. She was 31 years old. She had just given birth to her first child, and for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, she was clinically dead. But what happened in those 4 minutes changed everything she thought she knew about life, death, and what waits for us on the other side. Sarah grew up in a small town in rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and the seasons feel like old friends. She was, by every account, a woman who carried warmth wherever she went. Her laugh was the kind that filled a room. Her hands were always reaching, for a friend in need, for a stranger who looked lost, for anyone who seemed like they needed to feel less alone. She had married her college sweetheart, Daniel, at 27. They built a quiet life together, a house with a garden, a dog named Pepper, and a dream they both shared, starting a family. For 3 years, that dream was elusive. The miscarriages were devastating. Each one left a scar that didn't show on the surface, but lived just beneath it, in the way Sarah sometimes went quiet in the middle of a sentence, or how she'd hold her niece a little too long at family gatherings. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in February, the pregnancy test came back positive. And this time, it held. She spent the next 9 months in a state of careful, tender hope. She painted the nursery herself, soft yellow, the color of early morning light. She read every book. She talked to her daughter through her belly every single night. She named her Lily before she was even born, because, she told Daniel, she already knew exactly who she was. The birth began as planned. Sarah had spent weeks preparing, had chosen her hospital, had met her OB half a dozen times. Everything was in order. Everything felt ready. But labor has its own timeline. Complications emerged without warning. What the doctors would later describe as a severe postpartum hemorrhage, a catastrophic loss of blood, unfolded in the span of minutes. Sarah's blood pressure crashed. Her body began to shut down. Daniel, who had been holding her hand and telling her she was doing beautifully, watched as his wife's eyes went somewhere else. Not closed, not afraid. Just elsewhere. And then the machine screamed. The medical team moved with practiced precision. Compressions, emergency medications, transfusions, all happening at once. The room that had moments ago held the miracle of new life was now a battlefield. Daniel was ushered to a chair in the corner. He held Lily, newly born and blissfully unaware, against his chest. And he prayed in a way he hadn't since childhood. Raw, wordless, desperate prayer. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. That's how long Sarah was gone. Sarah later described the moment of death not as darkness, but as release. One instant she was in pain, caught in the chaos of her own body fighting to survive. And then, between one breath and the next, the pain was simply gone. Not numbed, not managed, gone, as completely as a candle being lifted from a dark room. She felt herself rise. She could see the room below her. She could see the doctors working on a body she recognized as her own, but no longer felt attached to. She could see Daniel in the corner, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in the soft folds of a yellow blanket wrapped around their daughter. She tried to call out to him. She says she knew, somehow, that no sound would come. But she felt something far stronger than sound pass between them. A wave of pure love, so complete it had weight, like something you could hold in your hands. She watched for a moment that felt both eternal and instantaneous. Then something shifted. Something called her forward. She described it first as a sensation of movement, not through space, but through something deeper than space. Like being carried by a current that had always existed, but that she'd never been able to feel until now. Then came the light. Not blinding, not harsh. The closest she could come to describing it was Warm. Light that felt like the moment you step inside from the cold, and someone who loves you is already there, waiting. It had a presence. It was aware of her, and she was not afraid. "I have never felt so known," she would later say. Not judged, not examined, just completely perfectly known. Like someone had always understood every part of me, even the parts I was ashamed of, and they loved me anyway. More than I can explain, more than I have words for. Then she saw them. Her grandmother, Clara, who had passed when Sarah was 12. The woman who had taught her to bake bread, who smelled of lavender and old books, who had sat beside Sarah's childhood bed during thunderstorms, and told her that fear was just love, with nowhere to go. Clara looked younger, radiant, whole in a way that transcended the physical. She reached out and held Sarah's hands, and Sarah says she felt, in that touch, every conversation they'd never had the chance to finish. There were others nearby, presences more than forms, beings of calm and light who did not speak in words, but communicated in something more direct than language. Understanding. Pure understanding, delivered without effort. Sarah felt, for the first time in her life, that she was home. Then something extraordinary happened. Her life came to her, not as a series of memories she was watching from the outside, but as something she was living again, all at once. Every moment, simultaneously present. Every experience, every word she had spoken, every kindness she had extended, and every hurt she had caused. But here is what she did not expect. She felt all of it from both sides. She felt what it had been like for her college roommate when Sarah had said something careless and dismissive during a vulnerable conversation. She felt the sting of it from the inside, not as punishment, but as understanding, as if the universe was simply showing her the full picture of moments she had only seen in part. She also felt the full weight of her kindnesses, and was staggered by how far they had traveled. A note she had left anonymously in a stranger's mailbox years ago, when that person was quietly falling apart. She had forgotten about it completely. The stranger had not. Sarah felt what that note had meant, how it had arrived on the one day that person had decided to give up. And she wept, not from sadness, but from the staggering realization of how much a single moment of genuine care can change the course of an entire life. She understood, in that place, that nothing was wasted. Not the grief, not the loss, not the years of longing for a child she feared would never come. Every thread of her experience had been woven into something larger than she could have imagined from the inside of her life. And then came something she struggles even now to put into words. A message, not delivered in language, but understood completely, absorbed the way sunlight is absorbed, through every surface at once. The message was this: love is not something you feel, it is something you are. It is the substance of which everything is made. The light she was moving through, the presence of her grandmother, the warmth of those luminous beings surrounding her. It was all the same thing. One thing, expressed in different forms, she was told, not in words, but in something more absolute than words, that she had come from love, and she would return to love, and that the entire human experience, with all of its suffering and confusion and searching, was love learning to know itself through the lens of limitation. She was told that Lily needed her, that the story she and Daniel were writing together was not finished, that there was more, so much more, that only she could give. She was given a choice. She says it did not feel like a hard one, and yet it was the most significant decision she has ever made. She chose to come back. She says the return was not peaceful. After what she had just experienced, re-entering a physical body was, by her own description, like being pressed back into something too small. The pain returned instantly. The noise of the room crashed over her like a wave. The lights were too sharp, the voices too fast, but she heard one sound above all of it: Lily, crying. The doctors would later describe her recovery as nothing short of remarkable, a phrase they offered carefully as doctors do, measuring every word. Her vital signs stabilize faster than expected. There was no neurological damage. She was, by every clinical measure, extraordinarily lucky. Daniel, who had been sitting in that corner chair through the longest minutes of his life, looked up when the alarm stopped. A nurse was smiling, and he began to cry in a way he had never cried before, not from grief, but from relief so total it had no name. When Sarah opened her eyes, the first thing she said, before she asked about the baby, before she asked what had happened, was, "I saw Clara. She said to tell you she still makes the bread." Daniel stared at her. He had never told Sarah about his grandmother's bread. The Sarah who left that hospital 3 weeks later was not the same woman who had entered it. This is not meant dramatically. She still laughed the same laugh, still loved Daniel in the same way, still kissed the top of Lily's head 30 times a day. But something foundational had shifted, something at the level of how she understood herself and the world she was moving through. Fear, she says, lost most of its power over her. Not that she stopped caring about outcomes. She still worried, still felt the ordinary anxieties of a new mother in an uncertain world. But beneath the worry, there was something new. A bedrock certainty that could not be shaken. A knowing, deeper than thought, that she was held. That this life had meaning. That the love she had felt in that luminous space was not something separate from the love she felt here. It was the same love, wearing different clothes. She left her marketing career 18 months after the experience and began training as a grief counselor. She sits with people who are dying now, and with people who are afraid of dying. And she says, quietly to each of them, "I have been there, and it is more beautiful than anything you are leaving behind." She doesn't ask them to believe her. She says she can see it in their eyes when they leave her. Something loosened. Something softened. Sarah Calloway is 43 years old now. Lily just turned 12, the same age Sarah was when she lost her own grandmother, the one who appeared to her in the light. She keeps a small journal. In it, she writes down the things she wants to remember. Not just what happened that night, but what it means, day by day, to carry that knowledge forward into an ordinary life. One entry, written in the first year after her return, reads simply, "The light was not something I found. It was something I remembered. Science has no settled explanation for what Sarah experienced. Researchers speak of oxygen deprivation, of neurotransmitters flooding a shutting-down brain, of the mind constructing meaning in the final moments of consciousness. These are not unreasonable theories. They may even contain parts of the truth. But they do not explain Daniel's grandmother's bread. They do not explain the hundreds of accounts from people across every culture, every religion, every corner of the world that echo Sarah's with a consistency that is, at minimum, worth sitting with. They do not explain the quality of the love she describes. Perhaps the most honest thing we can say is this: we do not know what consciousness is. We do not fully understand where it comes from or where it goes. We live in bodies that will one day stop, on a planet suspended in a universe whose scale is beyond our comprehension, asking questions that have occupied every human who has ever drawn breath. And perhaps that is not terrifying. Perhaps, as Sarah would tell you, if you asked her, that is the whole point. The mystery is not the absence of meaning. The mystery is meaning itself, so vast we can only glimpse it. And sometimes, in a hospital room at 3:47 in the morning, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the veil grows thin enough to see through.